favor of people-to-people interactions and is possibly even leading one, whether that's questions about the people on a general level.
Yeah, we just ask questions, we get the answers. I don't, and I would have asked the questions the same way if the Ford Foundation had funded it or anybody else, you know. So as far as the funding goes, I think we were grateful that we got the funds to do it. It didn't at all, as you know, we've asked the same questions for decades, and it didn't at all influence the I mean, just to suggest that it's kind of insulting. But the effect, that Rubio effect that you mentioned, I just threw that out. I've never said that before, you know, so I don't really know. But there was a sense that, and I'll let you answer this too, but during that period of time, right before the Obama, during the 2008, there was a sense of change towards the policy, and we measured, and that was the same answer to the same question, you know. So I'm not real sure why there was. I mean, I call it the election, 2008 election. So I think in general, Obama's coming in, created a certain anticipation for yes, we can. But I don't really have a hard answer as to why that was and then why it changed, other than we didn't. Yes, we can, but we didn't. You know, but maybe he has a more scholarly approach to it. But I just don't. I don't know. I mean, we asked the same question, and we feel like in general there were a lot of questions on polling during that period of time that were leaning towards things that are going to change. And in the Cuban population, it didn't strike us as odd as that would be one thing that might change. But anyway, that's the upward tick is more normalizing. If you look at that. The trend that pretty much normalizes, like the market stabilizes, but I think that the market of ideas kind of stabilized after Obama got in.
That, I just throw in, I think we did that poll like a month or so after the election, yeah. So it was that effect. But it's also interesting, over the years of the poll, if you look at the questions, there's always this sort of deep yearning for something that's going to change the situation. You know, so you see, if you like really look at the data for the 20 years or so we've done it, you know, things happen like the beginning of the special period and so on, and you see numbers move up and down, and the kind of interpretation is this hope for change, something to make it different, goes up when things happen. And most often, and this is probably a case also, there's disappointment and things don't change.
The citizens registered voters is quite simple. The registered voters can only be citizens, so the 100% is set. You know, we're talking 60% people are citizens. Yeah, from that 100%, that becomes 100% of the next calculation. Out of that 100%, 90% are registered to vote.
So it's not, I'm sorry, just to clarify, it's not 90% of the 1,000 people surveyed, it's 90%.
No, those of the ones that are citizens. If you say, yes, we're citizens, those are the only ones that have the possibility of being registered to vote. So of those, that's the other percentage.
And the question isn't even asked if you're not a citizen.
Yeah, we don't even ask the question if you're a citizen. If you're not a citizen, we don't ask if you're registered to vote. I mean, this isn't high elite. We don't do it like they do it in high elite.
Okay, right here. We'll follow up then on the next group of questions, please. Would you answer the gentleman's question?
No, wait. Okay, we have two more. I think the 1,000, how we got the 1,000, the random samples. The random samples I want to go as much detail as you want on the methods, because we have a methodological appendix in the back of the report that if you want to make your eyes bleed, you can go through all the way we weighted everything. So yes, it's a random sample. It's stratified by gender and population size.
Well, technically it's not stratified.
No, it's weighted. I meant weighted.
Yeah, weighted. It's a random digit dial sample, which means that the numbers are picked from telephone exchanges, the first part of the phone number, and then the last couple of digits, 3 digits, I think in this case, are randomly chosen. So on the first call, any household in Miami-Dade County can be picked. And we did both cell phones and landline phones in the end, about 2/3 of the interviews were done by cell phone and 1/3 by landline. So some people, it was asked if you're in the county, cell phones, obviously we get people who aren't. So then they were asked if this Cuban-American or Cuban, person of Cuban descent. If they were, then we continued the interview. So there was no selection process other than asking people if they were Cuban. Now, needless to say, someone Cuban could say no, or vice versa. You know, there's no way of, all the interviewers are bilingual, so they tell us, well, some people were Cuban and didn't want to, you know, said they weren't, easy way down.
One thing that's interesting about our polling is that once, in the back, we have the appendix. It tells you exactly how many calls we made, how many were successful, how many were not. If we get a Cuban talking, we can't shut them up. We have like 50% completion rate once they get through the door, right? So it's a very willing sample, but we do work the methodology as much as we can.
Okay, more questions?
The list of terrorism, yeah, it's a weird thing, but I think that the people, that's why I see in this a pattern of folks differentiating between pressure on the government and people, interaction among the people. The list, what's a list? You know, if I had to do that question over, I might do a couple of questions associated with what the list actually is, because this idea is abstract enough so that, yes, the idea that you want to keep pressure on the government is there. So, hey, you have a list that keeps pressure on Cuba. Yeah, I want it on that list, but I also want to send medicine to Tiapuca, and I want to be able to travel, and I want to be able to do all these other things. So there seems to be this dichotomy between a pressure on the government and interactions among people that might also increase pressure from another direction. I mean, that's my interpretation right now. I want to run some more numbers, and maybe I'll get back to you on it, more info.
Okay, let's go to the microphone. Thank you and good afternoon. Legally, what can we do to take it out of that list or out of the embargo? Legally, what can we do? Okay. What actions can we take? Thank you for the question. Next one.
That's above my pay grade, I'll tell you right now. I don't know.
You already asked the question.
Good morning, Nora from El Nuevo Herald, and this is a very simple question. Do you have the numbers of the Cubans that were born in Cuba and those who were born in the U.S., and why didn't you put that in this tables of controlling for arrivals? You know, like.
Yes. Thank you. Next question.
Hi, Rick Herrero. It's foreseeable that the same folks that have criticized this poll in the past will once again argue that, well, these numbers are insignificant because the only poll that matters is the election, right? Which, you know, it's a fair argument to make from a real political perspective, but it also sort of implies that Cuban-Americans are one-issue voters. I was wondering, how would you respond to that statement?
Why don't we take one last question over there and then go on to your...
Yes, two great questions. The question about the embargo refers to the embargo being able to bring the downfall of the Castro brothers, the regime, whatever you want to call it, or the amount of economic damage to the economy of the state. Is there, or is it the embargo in general?
Okay, thank you for your question.
And
One more? Yeah.
the last one. Over the last few years in Cuba, there's been a number of reforms, changes, whatever you want to call it. None of these issues are considered in the poll. Should they be considered or not? I mean,
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let me take a couple, and I'll leave the one here one. The legally what to do, I think, like your congressman, oh, never mind, don't do that. I mean, I think that's just a matter of exerting political pressure. I don't know what it is something that can be changed. These are all social constructs. I'm a sociologist. We can change what we create, but the pressure has to be exerted in the right way, and I'm not the guy to talk to about that. The one issue voter question is an important issue because it's an important question because I do. And the answer in my mind, after all these polls over the years, is the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? The more you see all these opinions changing, and then eventually folks are elected that have different opinions from those expressed up here. So I think that is a significant question, and one that over time, I think that the tide of demographics is simply going to recast that question. I think that Cubans now might be one-issue voters, but that it's not. We're not tapping the right issue. I think that if I were to put my political analyst hat on, I would say just like Reagan pulled out the Cuban vote in the '80s, talking about what at that point in time was on the minds of Cuban-Americans in the diaspora, that is the idea of Cuba being a satellite of the Soviet Union, and let's bring down the Soviet state, and therefore that might change things in Cuba. I think right now the Cuban population here, according to our numbers, they want to have some kind of interaction with the life that they're leaving behind, the once it comes to 1995. And that might be their one issue. That might be an important issue. We just haven't formulated it in a way that satisfies their I mean, there is resentment, there is bitterness. I mean, I have a cousin that came recently from Cuba, and she was, as we say, very well placed there. And she just came, and she is bitter, not about so much about the government, but about the hijo de puta that made life for impossible in Cuba, and the whole bureaucracy and the fact that she could not get ahead. She's really bitter about that, and it comes out in some ways and not in others. So I think that's a real element. We don't tap that, but I think it's a real element of the population. So I think that there is an issue out there that is not the Cold War issue in the Cuban population right now. But there hasn't been the formulation, the narrative, the discussion of it in a way that would mobilize voters for that issue. So that's just my opinion on that. The question on the embargo you saw it up there, it's a straight up question. So however you think it didn't work, if it's because the Castros are still there, or because of the economics that they can buy Coca-Cola through Spain or Venezuela, we don't put a valence on it, whether it's political or economic. We ask embargo. What do you think? What was the last question?
On economic reforms and...
Oh yes, we do deal with them. We do deal with those questions. We just didn't report them in this report. We're going up to Washington now to talk about the report in this context, but also add. We have a whole section in the poll of attitudes of our respondents about changes that are going on in Cuba now. Would they invest in Cuba? 20% said they would invest in small business in Cuba. What do they think about the travel restrictions that have been lifted in Cuba that make Miami a better place to work place? Will have a good impact on us or a negative impact? We do have those questions. We just didn't report them here. So a lot of information, and we wanted to get it out as quickly as possible. So we will be addressing that. So stay tuned. And I'll be glad to share. This is public information. We're a public institution. We have on the website those answers to those questions are up on the website. We just, didn't approach this presentation that way. But they're
Do you want to add something?
Oh, I just say, is the link to the website in?
Yes, it is. Okay.
And the
say-
born here, born there. You want to?
Oh, Cubans born here and
Right. Okay, I wish, in terms of that question, I wish I had my laptop here so I could get the numbers. I'll just say three things. One is in the past polls when we did the years of people coming from Cuba, we had another column for people born here. And we found that was confusing to people. So this year, that chart just shows people who were born in Cuba and came here and not people who were born here. The rest of the charts include people who were born here, including the age one. The second part of the question is, in terms of the numbers, two parts to that. I mean, one is, I looked when we were doing the weighting to get the probabilities of people in each demographic group the same, to balance out different response rates for the poll. I look at all the numbers of the categories, and I wish I had the numbers here. I was actually surprised from the census data that the percentage of the Cuban population that's born here is much smaller than I thought it was. I guess partly because I wasn't thinking about the huge wave of new arrivals.
Low birth rate.
Mhm.
Yeah, but still, even given that, the proportion of people in the sample that were born here is lower than the population. And I don't know how much lower. I think it's in the order, I don't even want to say, but I think probably the ratio might be even 2 to 1 in terms of the sample. The sample numbers should show twice the percentage for people born here. And the reason for that is we don't control for that in the weighting process. The weighting process is supposed to compensate for, or to give each demographic group a probability of being in the poll proportion of their numbers in the population. And we only do that by gender and by age group, not by where people are born. And then the reason why we do cell phones helps balance, because a cell phone sample tends to be more men and younger. The landline sample tends to be more women and older, but it still doesn't even it out. And I mean, to have a 50% of the people we reach who are Cuban complete the poll is a great completion rate. But the sort of downside of it is it does oversample people who are intensely interested in the issue. And I think the second generation may not be as intensely interested. So, complicated answer, I don't know if it answers.
Well, the simple answer is we had in our sample, the folks that were born in Miami, not born on the island, were more likely to hang up. And so we have a good chunk, but it's not proportional to the population. So if we, in the big picture, we can't go back and weight it just by that and give you a report just of using that as a weight, but we chose not to because a lot of those younger ones, we got them the age. We got the folks born here are younger, and we have them in the age category. So we decided to go that way.
Okay, let's do another, perhaps final round of questions.
Thank you. One last question. You mentioned the weighting of the groups divided by party, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit more in the last part about how the statistics here were different than the ones online. It was a lower number of Republicans. Can you just explain a little bit?
I remember that. Yeah, when we weighted by the variables that we weighted by, instead of 53%. I know this number very well because we talked about it. Which one's the report? Should we report that? I said, well, let's do it online with a weighted sample, and then let's do the presentation based on the trend, right? So the trend says 52% Republican. When we weighted out there in the population, it's 46% Republican. Right, but we would have to go back and reweight everything else. So it's 46%. Of the population in Miami right now is Republican, which means the decline. I mean, I don't even want to talk about what it's compared, because we just saw the trend based on unweighted measures. So we have to go back and weight all those to see exactly what the decline has been.
So is this the first time a poll was weighted then?
Excuse me?
Is this the first time then a poll?
No.
Why wasn't it weighted earlier?
It was, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the weighting, all polls worth their salt are weighted, simply because with different, it's interesting as a researcher. If you're doing a research study, you almost never weight the results because you're only interested in what the data say. But when you're you're doing a poll, you're trying to make the best possible estimate to the population, which is why we wait. Part of the answer, the real answer is lack of time. I mean, if we had had more time, what I would have done was gone back. I mean, I think probably the last 3 polls, the results that you see on the website are weighted. But it's hard to like check the methodology, and then the first ones were not weighted. Now the census data are easier to get. I want to go back and take each poll and rerun the data and weight it so it's more exactly comparable. But due to lack of time to get this, you know, we've been working like crazy, but there's a lot of stuff we still would like to do. We haven't done that, so it just seemed easier to leave the number.
Thank you.
Yes, it
And
was.
we are running out of time, so let's take the next 2 questions, and I think.
Yes, Pedro González Gomez. Again, thank you very much, professors. It's a very interesting poll. My question goes like, this is a slow movement towards logic, towards the normalization against this logic embargo and no diplomatic relations. Do you think that has something to do because of the immigration accords in 1995-96, that the population is changing dramatically? I said, when the Cubans opened the door to immigration and changed, you know, the property, the passports, etc. Do you think that's the reason that we are seeing an increase slow, but an increase through normalization?
Thank you. Let's take one final question, please.
When you looked at the issue of how important Cuba would be in somebody casting their vote, do you do a ranking of where it ranks relative to economy or other issues?
No. Yeah, that's of course the significant question, and we probably in the next time we should do it, because in polling in general in the United States, when you ask people what's most important, you know, crime is like number 1. Everybody sort of wants to be safe when you walk into a store. And then maybe education, they'll throw something else in. You know, so Cuba, I would suspect, is not among those 2 top 3 in general. But we just asked, but I don't know the answer to that question. We just asked specifically.
Last time we looked at it, it was about number 9.
Way down.
Andropic.
Yeah. So this kind of isolates it. The whole poll is about Cuba, so folks are thinking about Cuba, so they might give an inflated value to how important Cuba is in many ways. Population increase based on an exact change. Well, I don't know if it's a move towards the próximo lechoncito en La Habana normalization process, but clearly the 1995 migration accord has normalized among all the abnormal things between the 2 countries, that it has normalized migration. So in that normalization of migration, it is having a deep impact on our social fiber in general. And part of that, I mean, these are also, the new arrivals are also portable. They're doing 2 or 3 jobs. We didn't report that data either. We're going to be working it. So there's a differentiation of the population based on that agreement, because a lot more people are coming over, and they're overwhelming in numbers. They will see that be the dominant group relatively soon. Whether that will lead to normalization, one would think so, but you know, there are a lot of horses in the race. I don't know which way to bet it.
Good. Well, I want to, before we end, I want to note that the CRI FIU EDU website has all the results, including the tables that weren't presented here. So they're on page 7 of the report. So you can go there and look at the numbers and play around with them. So thank you very much, Professor Grenier. Thank you all for coming. And there's still some food in the back for please enjoy. Thank you all.
Yeah.